everyone, and welcome to Sea Trade Cruise webinar on how COVID-19 will affect the future of entertainment and attractions in the cruise industry. Thank you so much for joining us today from all over the world. My name is Ryan Stana, and I am from RWS Entertainment Group, and I am the host of today's presentation. First, few housekeeping notes. I want to let you know that we are recording today's webinar and a link will be sent to you all tomorrow. Also, if you're having difficulty hearing us today and are listening through your computer, please click your speaker volume on the right by the chat box if you need to. Also, on the right side of your screen, that chat box will be there to assist you with any issues. And now I would like to introduce you to today's panel. First is John Hollenbeck, who is the VP of North America Operations at IAAPA. If you do not know, IAAPA is the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions. And they developed a reopening guidance handbook for the attractions industry. And we believe that theme parks and cruise ships have a lot in common as far as operations, and his knowledge will be really useful for all of us today.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, John. Next up, we're going to welcome Rick Gray, who is the General Manager of Entertainment Operations from Wynn Las Vegas, which actually right now the Wynn Las Vegas is opening in the next hour for the first time since COVID. Wynn Las Vegas was one of the first leisure and attractions establishments to roll out their COVID report on how their operations will resume. And this report also had a heavy focus on show operations, which is much needed for us today. So welcome, Rick.
Hi, all.
And finally, last but not least, we have Ryan Murphy. He is the Vice President of Aurora Productions. Aurora works in production management and technical supervision of shows in New York City and on tour. Ryan is part of a community of individuals discussing plans and procedures to combat the COVID crisis for Broadway. And as you know, Broadway quality is something that we in entertainment are aiming for every day for our guests, and his knowledge will be very, very insightful today. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
We feel the information these gentlemen have learned in the different sectors of entertainment will help us as a cruise industry greatly. So for an icebreaker before we start today, I want each of our panel, and we'll start with Ryan Murphy, to tell us their favorite cruise. And if you haven't been on a cruise, I know a couple of the attendees joining today would gladly sell you a cruise right now. So Ryan, go ahead with cruise memory.
So my best cruise memory, we took my sister-in-law and her family on a cruise a few years ago. We all went together, and my niece was probably 10 or 12 at the time and never been snorkeling before. We took her snorkeling for the first time, and I distinctly remember she was totally shocked and amazed at all of the fish and the size and all of that experience. But the best part about the whole thing was you could literally hear her screaming through the snorkel as the fish would come up to her face. So you'd hear this like every single time that any fish would come remotely close to her. But I will remember that forever because it was one of those things that like you truly never get to see somebody realize that for the first time. So it was really cool.
And what cruise line? Everyone's wondering, what cruise line was that?
It was a Royal Caribbean cruise.
Great, great. Okay, hey, Rick Gray, how about you?
My kind of best memories when I worked for Disney, I got a chance to go on Disney Cruise Line, and I took my family. I'd never been on a cruise before, and I was just amazed by it. You know, you hear all the stories, you hear how big it is, and the theaters and the restaurants, and it's really just kind of a city at sea, and in the same way that the theme parks are, you know, a city, and that we are here in Vegas. So I was just bowled over by the whole thing.
Great. And last but not least, John?
Mine was Royal Caribbean as well, and I actually had the ability to take my entire family on a cruise a few years ago, and it was actually my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And the same year it was my wife and I's 25th wedding anniversary. And my sister, who's my only other sibling, it was her 10th anniversary. So we had a lot of good memories and a lot of good fun, did quite a few shore excursions, and just really were able to bring the family together and celebrate all those great moments. It was a good time.
Great. So everyone that's joining today's webinar, I'm sorry I did not diversify our group more other than Royal Caribbean and Disney. So I'll strive for that next time. That will be one of my questions before we ask them to be panel members. So the goal of today is to ask advice and best practice on the future of entertainment on board ships when cruising resumes. We will ask questions for insights and ideas for successful entertainment that ensures safe guest interaction and safety of our staff. So in addition to the questions registered attendees gave to us today for the webinar, on May 28th, I also hosted a roundtable of entertainment executives from cruise lines all over the world. This roundtable allowed us to come up with a list of questions to ask our panel today. Once I asked all the questions that the attendees submitted in and we came up with the roundtable, we are going to open questions and answers to everybody that's attending today. So if you have a question in the chat box, feel free to go in under questions and ask those questions. I will try to get through as many as possible. But we're going to tackle the first 15 right now, and we have another 50 minutes ahead of us. So, okay, we're going to begin. The first is procedures and policies that we're going to cover, and I'm going to give this one over to John to answer. So the question is, what degree of policies and protocols are coming from local/state authorities or federal authorities, MGOs or NGOs, such as the CDC, the WHO, etc.?
Yeah, well, if you look at just a brief history of IAAPA, just so everybody's aware, we are the global association for the attractions industry, and we certainly include, cruise ships and cruising as part of attractions. So many similarities are there. And we have 4 regions around the world. I take care of the United States and Canada. We also have offices in the Asia Pacific, in Mexico City, and in Brussels that takes care of the European, Middle East, and Africa regions. We work together to create the IAAPA reopening guidance document, which is a 36-page kind of foundation of those policies and processes, just to allow our members, and currently right now our non-members as well. Our IAAPA.org website is open to anyone. If someone's interested to go to there, it's IAAPA.org, and we have a lot of great COVID-19 resources that are categorized by region, by subject matter, and then also the reopening guidance is in there. And that really is a document that provides a basis for thought for any industry that's looking to reopen their facilities. It gives some general guidance on maybe safety of entering and exiting facilities, a little bit about sanitization. Obviously, face masks are covered in there. And it goes a little more deep into some specific things like water parks or water attractions, indoor or outdoor attractions, food and beverage outlets, retail spaces. So it really is pretty comprehensive. But again, it is a foundation, and we've seen over time in the last few months, a lot of states and locales have created the rules and regulations or rules of engagement to be able to reopen facilities. And these are really guidelines that help others devise their plans to be able to combat some of the restrictions or requirements. And maybe combat's a bad word. It's really to complement those, to be able to make sure that you can go to here. I'm located in Orlando, Florida. So here the Orange County government has required any attractions to make a formal presentation that has the date they're going to reopen, outlines policies and procedures that they are going to use so that they can prove that they will be safe in reopening, and being safe means for the team members as well as guests. And then the county makes a recommendation to the governor as to if they think those plans are sufficient and that facilities can reopen. Most of the presentations that have come through have been approved and have gone to the governor. And actually, I was at Universal Orlando this morning because they reopened for annual pass holders the last 2 days, and they're reopening for general public tomorrow. So the processes and policies that they use have a little bit of a foundation from the IAAPA document. Obviously, they've come up with their own as well. And those do follow those groups that you had mentioned, Ryan, the CDC, the WHO, and it really looks at what is required in there, puts that in the plan, puts some of the guidance document that IAAPA and IAAPA members from around the world have helped to develop, and then uses their own policies and protocols and beliefs to make sure that they're creating a program that not just the guests, again, are being safe, but also team members. So it's utilizing all of those. We've seen in the United States particularly that it is a state by state and even a county by county decision as to reopen. And those thoughts from governments in the states are all over the board. Some places are allowed to reopen, some are in the process of going through those plans right now, and some are taking a hard line and saying you're not going to be able to reopen anything until we find a cure or a vaccine. So, you know, there really is a gamut of things that are out there. And I'm sure some of the other speakers will talk a little bit about regionality. You know, it does depend too on how hard a certain region or space has been hit. And again, our guidelines were just really put out to be a thought starter, to be able to be a basis to start making plans on your own.
Great, thanks, John. So this next question will transition over to Rick or John if you want to answer, but what are you currently doing with communication between guests and staff? And is there communication training in this COVID world right now?
Well, from a Wynn point of view, we first of all let everybody know what our sanitization disinfection plan is. It's on our website, so our guests can understand. Our guests want to know when they're calling in now for reservation, are they going to be safe? We have, put in a policy where everybody gets checked for temperature on the way in. There are stanchion signs that give a generalized version of what we are doing on site. We have stickers, vinyl, basically stickers that we put on the floor for basically having the correct distancing. As our guests go through each and every part of the resort, they are guided, if you will, by the employees who are in that area, as well as, we're a fairly high touch resort because we are 5-star. So we always try to anticipate guest needs. We have a lot of people walking around. If we see somebody looking confused or seems to want something answered, we try and anticipate that. We're going to have a smile brigade that's going to go around and make sure that people are social distancing because, what we see is that it's very difficult for people to do that by themselves. And people also don't want to turn to somebody and say, why are you standing next to me? They want to have a good experience. So we're trying to communicate as much as we possibly can without inundating our guests with the hundreds of pages of documentation that I think we've all created on, what we've done at the resort to make it clean and safe.
Yeah, great. So John, turning this over to you, I know a lot of parks and resorts were talking about this. With now the mask covering that employees are wearing, they're not able to communicate as easily as before. So they're using bigger hand signals and whatnot. So I found that very interesting. So if you could speak on behalf of that.
Yeah, interaction is interesting now because of the covering of the face. You can't really see those smiles. That we're all in this business for the smiles, so it's kind of tough for that one. But even some observations from places that I've seen pictures, video, or actually been able to attend is, there is a lot more entertainment factor that is there. These entertainment folks may be up on an archway like a band or a drum corps, or if there's some characters that typically would be more close to you or even touching you are on stages or pedestals or in windows of facades if you have, that ability. And then there's others where typically you might see a parade with some floats or some other things where at some portion of that, entertainment area, they might come down and interact with the guests. Now they're staying on the floats, but still interacting. Most of the characters, obviously, if they're costumed characters, don't need to worry as much about the mask. But all of the people that are, the operations crew that are nearby are in masks, and because they're a little bit closer to the guests. So it has been a bit of a strange thing, but communicating verbally and kind of seeing and interacting, and you can kind of see the little squints when people smile a little bit. So it's more smiling with your eyes than anything now, I guess.
Yeah, that was what one of our clients were saying is, make sure you show the emotion with your eyes as much as possible to connect with the guests, even from a distance. But John, with these parks that are opening, what level of risk are we able to accept with the spread of the disease? Assuming it will be different for various environments, but what is that level of risk?
Yeah, we look a lot at having participants make sure that they're also a part of that equation. If somebody isn't feeling well, don't come to one of the venues or one of the attractions, because you're just going to, create a bigger issue than what needs to have happen. So it takes a little bit of participant help to make sure that things are safe. But most of the attractions that, we talk about, especially if they're outdoor, it's been proven outdoor areas are a lot lower in risk. Even areas where if people are wearing masks and following protocols are lower in risk. People are following that physical distancing. I'm not a big fan of social distancing as a term, because I think we all still need to be social. But if you're staying away from each other, that absolutely helps. And then even on indoor properties, now restaurants are starting to not just be takeout or delivery. They're opening up patios, they're opening up indoor facilities, and being mindful of those, where people are sitting, etc. And just being mindful as well of family units or household units. Typically if you're with a family of 4 and you're together all the time, you're able to stay together. You just need to be mindful of the other group that's maybe around you. And, there are going to be people that bust the 6-foot limits and other things, but you just have to kind of keep an eye on that and do what you can to try to make sure that any protocols that are being asked for are being followed, and that you're just taking a little extra care in what you're doing as well to keep everybody safe.
Great. So now we're going to move on to a next topic, which everyone is a hot button issue, is facility and venue. And I'm going to turn this over to Rick first. What are the expectations for the non-traditional theater spaces such as nightclubs, pool decks, aqua clubs, etc., in addition, possibly activities?
Well, in the state of Nevada, the government has declared that there are no nightclubs that will open. It is that is the mandate, and they haven't given us any idea of how to reopen the nightclubs. So that's something that, because of the nightclub experience, it's, I think, almost an impossibility at this point to determine how those are going to reopen, because clearly the idea is that there's lots of people crammed together, and that is absolutely part of that experience with the DJ or the performer. As far as pool decks, we are opening up our pool today. We are having, I would agree with John, we don't use the term social distancing, we say physical distancing. We always want to be social, but there is a certain distance that we have, and we are going to essentially have people who will monitor people's physical distancing at the pool, and we have appointments made so people can come, they can sign up, they can get an appointment to come to the pool, in the same way we're doing that with our physical workout centers, with our spas. All of it is by appointment now, and there's a certain amount of time that you can be there, so everybody is able to partake in that. So there are a number of things that we are doing, and to be honest with you, we're just reopening today. We're going to see how well all of this works out, and we will adjust as we need to. I think the biggest question is what happens in a traditional theater situation, and I know that's what Ryan's struggling with, what we're struggling with. There are very few examples of how this has been addressed over the world. We put forth a plan that said, if in order to keep the 6 foot physical distancing, what we would do is we would only seat people in every other row. Groups that came together could sit together. Otherwise, there'd be 3 seats in between groups. And what that does is it means that you reduce your capacity in any theater to about 25%. And for an area like us, for a casino, we may be willing to kind of subsidize that. I think for regional theaters, for Broadway, let Ryan talk about it. It's just very difficult to make that all work.
Yeah, great segue. So Ryan Murphy, Broadway, theater, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. We struggle with how the economics of doing a big Broadway production will function with a reduced capacity, because we obviously have to address social distancing. I am currently working with one show that's talking about potentially doing a socially distanced or a physically distanced production at some point in time, and that's all very, very, very preliminary at this point, because we're still very dependent upon what other local regulations and guidelines will come up. Being in New York City, we're sort of at this sort of the American epicenter of this entire thing, which really complicates what we're able to do. I think that we're talking physically about trying to pair seats for the most part, and then take large numbers of seats out so that there's no impetus for people to want to move to different seats or try to move themselves around. We also have very physically limited spaces in terms of appropriate channels for egress and for aisles, additional aisles, so that people aren't brushing past each other and touching other people's seats on the way to their seats and that kind of thing. And so what you do to reformat your theater, especially in New York, where all our buildings have sort of landmark tags that prevent you from doing too much physical change to them, becomes a huge conversation that is still very much ongoing.
And Ryan, for in between show cleanings, have there been any talk of use of fogging? And if you use the fogging, does it affect the performers? Because I know Phantom of the Opera is doing it in Korea right now. And what is that outcome, have you heard?
I mean, we are all talking about what fogging might mean and that kind of thing in terms of the best ways to clean facilities. It's amongst a pile of ways that we're talking about doing things too, which might be that you're doing a general fogging of things to try to keep the atmosphere, the ozone that results from that down a little bit, and then coming through with cleaners to do another more intensely touched area or something like that. There's a lot of technology out there right now as it relates to looking at things based on far UVC light. It's something that we have looked at relatively extensively, or started to look at what the options might be for how that can be put into place. But performer safety is a huge concern, because we not only have to make sure that we have the confidence of the people who are coming to the theater, but they have to be confident for the performers on stage, and those have direct connections to each other. So looking at what it means for vocalists in particular, it might also mean that the answer has to be, we don't do 2 show days on Broadway or something like that. And that could be something that needs to be contemplated too.
Rick, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that, we've looked at a couple of these things, and what we are understanding now, originally the idea was that the virus could stay active on fabric for quite some time. Now they're saying it's less. What we're discovering is that, and we have a group here that every single day they go to the various websites, CDC, World Health Organization, Southern Nevada Health District, and try to find out what that day's updates are. None of these organizations are telling you that things are updated, but every single day there are updates. So we're trying to keep up with what the new requirements are, what the updates are, what the information is. And we're finding that some things, originally in this pandemic, we were all told, wear gloves, don't worry about masks. Then it was, gloves are the worst thing you can have, everybody has to wear masks. So, and that's a very extreme example, but it's a true example. So we're trying to find out what the best thing is on a regular basis. And I agree with Ryan, we've looked at UV, we've looked at electrostatic, we've looked at a variety of different things, and trying to figure out which are the best. We are lucky in that we're a water show, and the chlorinated water is essentially a disinfectant for the virus. I mean, we know that if you look at Center for Disease Control, they've said that. But, the other issue that you have is you can't sit too close to the stage now. In Vegas, the state has said you can open movie theaters, but you can't open a theater with live performance. And part of that is because of the projection of somebody singing or whatever, and how their saliva atomizes and goes out to the first 10 rows.
Right. And going off of that more with wardrobe and scenic and props, are you doing anything with that, Rick or Ryan? Have there been talks about specific materials to use in this world now?
I mean, if you have the luxury of building your scenery and your props and things from scratch, you may consider materials that are more easily cleaned. Most of us don't have that luxury. Everything that we have exists already in some fashion. So it's figuring out the best ways to treat and clean the things that exist already. It's one of the reasons we've talked a little bit about far UVC and that kind of thing. There is a long-term degradation for fabric over time, but it might be something that can be done for a period of time safely. Costumes typically get a large spray of things like that reduce contaminants anyway already, and a lot of that stuff is just being amped up in terms of the amount that they're using or in terms of how frequently they're spraying that stuff down. And I think personal diligence for people who are performing those acts in terms of your wardrobe crew or your backstage crew is definitely something that needs to be championed over and over and over again, in terms of constantly reminding people to wash hands, that things need to be done thoroughly, that there is no way that we're skirting one thing or another, because it really could mean substantial repercussions for whoever's wearing those clothes.
Right. And John or Rick, is there anything else you would like to add with materials?
Well, one thing is, it's all about, really, this is not an airborne virus unless you're getting those water droplets direct from somebody. Other than that, it really is a touch surface where you're exposing your hands or something and then going to your face from there. So I think, for just thinking out loud, for sets and scenic type things, if there is pieces that are being touched by performers, those are things obviously you would want to focus on. But just wallpaper of a set or other things, it's not going to just radiate off of that. So it really is about seeing your horizontal surfaces and making sure any of those touch surfaces are being looked at, so somebody doesn't expose themselves to that area and then expose themselves to their own face. That doesn't say anything about if something is getting breathed on or whatever. That might add a little bit of a piece to that. But it really is an issue of making sure that if you're staying distant from each other and not continually breathing or coughing or sneezing into somebody's face, that the risks there get lower and lower as you kind of move into those areas that aren't touch surfaces.
For sure. Rick, for a question for you, how extensive do the protocols reach that you're putting in place at Wynn Las Vegas? For example, point A to Z, front of house, back of house, and are you treating performers as a family unit? So for example, are we treating them as a family that quarantine together and they stay together throughout the workday, or are they treated as individuals coming into?
Well, I think, what we've done, well, for one thing, Wynn has had everybody tested who works here, all 12,000 people. And that was originally not mandated. It became mandated. So at least from an initial pass, we know who had the virus and who did not. We elected not to do antibody testing because it was not considered to be effective enough in terms of really knowing, making sure it was 100% accurate. But in terms of treating people as a family unit, we can't really tell everybody, you know, we have to trust people. You know, they go home. We have to, you know, trust that they will physical distance, that they'll follow, you know, the kind of sanitization procedures, disinfection procedures. But we have been very specific about creating policies and procedures for Backstage, for each of our shops, for how people are let into the theater, how they line up for tickets, how they line up to get a popcorn. So if we have the opportunity to put these into place, we're going to be able to do that. Once again, I'm very lucky because a lot of our performers work in the pool. So, you know, we have that. And any technician who does not work in the pool is required to basically, once they, you know, if they have to be in contact with a performer, to sanitize their hands before, sanitize after. You know, everybody has to follow the rules. And I think if you read anything about a Phantom of the Opera in South Korea, that's one of the things they point out, is that it's crucial that everybody, you know, follow the social distancing, wearing of masks, and following, you know, the proper protocol.
Great. And then also, Rick or John, from a staffing or performer standpoint, how do we get staff or performers to take a contract now with the state of health in the entertainment industry? Are you offering incentives such as health insurance to entice them? In addition, how are you boosting the morale in your department?
Well, I would say from an attraction standpoint, obviously whatever attraction or company is providing any type of entertainment that you want to be a part of, it would be looking at what their policies and procedures are and just seeing what you're comfortable with. The same with cruise industry, and I'm sure with Broadway and theme parks, et cetera, is, you know, there are people that are together for long periods of time, whether it be annual contracts or even longer. And you kind of get a comfort level for where that's coming from. You see what the protocols are of the position that you're looking into, and if there's a personal comfort level there, I think that helps in your decision making. But you know, a lot of this, you know, honestly, is about optics, and it's about companies having a plan and showing that they're taking this seriously and doing things to make sure that they're keeping people as safe as possible. But that may not be safe for everybody. So you have to kind of look at what's there and what's happening and make those decisions on a personal basis.
Sure. Rick, how about on your end?
We've been incredibly fortunate in that when we decided to shut down the casinos, which was in mid-March, our CEO, Matt Maddox, said that he was going to pay everybody. And so we all got full salaries, full benefits until this date. You know, we are opening today. Unfortunately, because we can't figure out, you know, how to open the theaters at this point because of the Southern Nevada requirements, my team has been furloughed, but they will continue getting their health benefits until at least the end of August, when we hope we'll be able to open again. So, you know, from that point of view, we've basically taken care of our people. They do get contracts. My belief is you really have to communicate and be open with people. And during this time when we haven't been together, I've been communicating on a daily basis through the heads of departments to our, you know, line level employees, writing weekly report letters of this is what we know this week, this is where we think we're going, and people will accept that. You know, I think that everybody understands we're in it together. And, you know, the performers are not going to get the coronavirus any more than a technician will or a salaried staff member. So it's not like we're sending them out into some place where, you know, they're the sacrificial lambs. They get that we're all in this together, and they'll do what it takes, you know, as long as they know what's going on.
Sure. Now, moving on to show execution. So this is for any of you on the panel today. Assuming budgetary constraints remain in place, where have you found cost savings? In which areas have you also increased spending, or vice versa? So who wants to take that one?
I guess I can speak to the fact that, like, I think nobody on Broadway is performing anything yet. So there is absolutely no way that we know 100% what the knockdown from a budget standpoint is going to be yet. But I think that everybody acknowledges that in order to create confidence for both your performers and for people attending, there may need to be expenditure that happens up front in terms of increased cleaning and that kind of thing. I don't know that there are savings to be made. There are conversations that could potentially be had with the different unions that work on Broadway in relation to reduced weeks or things like that. But a lot of that means rethinking the process of how things are done, and that may not be completely desirable across the board. But I think there will have to be investment and money spent up front to be able to make it safe for people, and that's just something that we do to be able to get everybody back to work again.
For sure. Rick or John?
Yeah, I would just say that, I mean, when you look in the association world, obviously we try to make connections with our members as much as we can. So there is quite a bit of travel that happens. We've definitely curtailed that. Some reasons because we can't travel or aren't allowed to, and others just because, things aren't open. So we're not doing as many networking events in certain places. We're not having as many education sessions out into the public. They're becoming more like this, a virtual, endeavor. So it really is looking at kind of maybe not saving money, but changing the money you're spending. And for us, it just has resulted in being less because, travel costs can be a bit hefty. So that's definitely has gone down considerably in the last few months for us.
Rick?
I don't think there are any really cost savings to have at this point. I think you've got to do what is required and then figure it out later. Nobody's going to pat anybody on the back for not using hand sanitizer. All this stuff's expensive. So from that point of view, I think you do what is the right thing at this point, and we figure it out later. We're postponing, I know I am, some capital improvements that we thought we might do into future years. I think if there are any cost savings, and I may be totally wrong about this, but this is certainly the approach that we're taking, is that, if you want to remain with the company and we give you a contract, there's no raises. We are not going to be able to offer any raises for the coming year because we've already spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to keep things, just going. So, but I think those are minor, really.
Yeah, for sure. So those were the questions that were sent in from attendees and the roundtable. Now I'm going to open it to all the people from around the world that have joined in and placed questions in this chat box. So I'm going to forewarn you, this is my first time opening a chat box to read questions. So if I mess up, please do not judge me, and Rick and John and Ryan, do not get mad at me. So the first question I have for you is, does Universal Studios require attendees to wear masks for the day?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there are varying thoughts on that. And again, as we talked earlier in the webinar, there's definitely different opinions from different states or different jurisdictions, where some counties or states require masks to be worn to be able to open up. Others just suggest or encourage it. So it really is up to the, the business and whatever jurisdiction they're in. There actually are some attractions that may have multiple facilities across the country where they have to follow different rules just because the states have different rules. So we've seen a lot where a company will have a facility in one state that it's mandated that you must wear a mask, where in another it's encouraged. And then that company will make the decision if they want to be, same across all of their locations, or if they want to have the ability to have guests make that decision themselves. So we've really seen different varying versions of that. Here at Universal in Orlando, it is mandated. You must wear a mask. Obviously, if you're in a restaurant or if you're walking in the park and you have a beverage or something, you can't eat or drink through your mask. So there is some leniency there. And I thought something that was really interesting that I saw this morning when I was at Universal was they have areas where you can stop, because it is hot and humid here in Florida, where you can stop and go into this area, and as long as you're practicing that physical distancing, you can remove your mask in a certain zone. But then when you go back out of that zone, you must put the mask back on. So that lets people breathe some fresh air, get a little bit of a break. not feel so hot or, you know, congested. And I thought that was a really good idea. But for the most part, universal at this point, at least in Florida. I don't know what the mandate will be in California when the parks open there, but they are mandating masks.
Great, thank you, John. Next question is, how are you looking at staging for performers given social distancing protocols and that those stagings require physical contact? Anyone want to take that one?
About this extensively, and what we decided to do in our show Le Rev is to, where possible, limit those interactions. So as opposed to physically kissing and things like that, to just try and limit as much of that as you can. But the reality is, you know, I hate to say it, but the show is the show. And you know, I think that it's not that the performers are taking calculated risk, but if people are tested and they know they don't have the virus, which we are going to continue to try and, you know, do, is regularly test everybody, that, you know, and they respect each other and follow the protocols, which we are asking them to do, then, you know, they can do a show. That's what they've discovered, certainly at Phantom in South Korea. And I, you know, if you had to socially distance or physically distance everybody on stage, you could never have a musical. I mean, you know, you know where you put all those people.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I was telling people on the roundtable last week, we had a client that has now added into their contracts the illusion of touch to be used in the staging of all of our show product. So I don't know if that's a legal name. We're looking into it as we go through this, but illusion of touch. So the next question is going over to Rick. How does the Smile Brigade work?
How does the Smile Brigade work?
Yes.
The Smile Brigade works by, there's a number of executives, and I'm one of them, and we are taking 4-hour sessions and going through the resort, and we are looking for guests who are not with a party, who are too close to each other, and we go over to them and we just remind them in a very nice manner that we require physical distancing of 6 foot, and, you know, we would appreciate if they would follow those rules and regulations and move on to somebody else. You know, we try and do it in a very nice manner, in a friendly manner, and most people, you know, we believe will respond in a positive manner.
Great, thank you. There's a lot of questions here on performer blocking and the illusion of touch, so I'm skipping through a lot of that, which is making this difficult right now. But okay, next questions. At the protest I went to the other day, there were people walking around with hand sanitizer offering squirts. Is that something ships and parks and theaters are considering?
From a theater standpoint, I mean, all of the theater owners that I've been talking with are all talking about making sure that there are stations that are set up that are hands-free that you can go to. I don't know that from a theater perspective it makes sense to have people walking around to share that stuff, but everybody's talking about stations and how you retrofit and add stations wherever you can that also allow for free movement of crowd through confined spaces.
Yes, great.
Theater,
what?
You know,
oh, go ahead, Rick. Sorry.
In the theater that I run, we have 20 touchless hand sanitizer stations, front of house and back of house. I mean, there's not a place you can go where you can't sanitize your hands. For everybody who comes in the resort, we are offering them a free face mask that we encourage them to wear after doing a temperature check. And we are not requiring our guests to wear a face mask except in certain instances, at the spa, for instance. When we open the theater, my feeling is I would require guests who want to see a show to wear a face mask. I think that would be one of the effective ways to kind of limit any kind of transmission. At least that's what we're told by the epidemiologists.
For sure. So this is a great question for the panel, especially Rick and Ryan. What's the focus on the back of house protocols look like for performers backstage, technicians backstage, and stage managers? What's the physical distancing put in place? And also, are we asking them to wear PPE?
Yes, we are asking everybody to wear PPE, I think, is the answer to that part of the question. I think that you know, there are a lot of things that we do on Broadway where you require people to be in close proximity to each other, you know, be it a set piece that needs to be taken, you know, from its flown position down safely and that kind of thing. So wearing gloves, wearing masks, and how you interact in those particular situations is something that we're looking at. There's also, I believe that everybody will end up putting into place, you know, specific protocols that relate to everybody getting temperatures checked and everybody, you know, being able to be tested on a regular basis. And then also, I think there's an element of contact tracing that will end up going on for companies a little bit too, as it relates to people's significant others who may have been exposed. And what does that mean? And I think Rick mentioned it earlier, but I think direct communication with everybody will have to continue through this process in a way that has an open, transparent way of, you know, there's no, you know, knockdown if you are ill or you think you're ill or you're staying home or whatever that may be, because you're taking that precaution for the betterment of everybody involved.
I would add from an attraction standpoint, you know, really it's walking the walk in general. Safety is always the #1 priority, especially in theme parks and attractions where there's rides and other things. So as much as you can do of teaching what needs to happen back of house and getting the employees accustomed to what needs to happen, really help them to make sure that they understand what needs to happen front of house with guests and also with themselves. So I think it's really important to set that example behind the scenes so that, again, it's a bit of optics, but it definitely helps to let guests understand, oh, these guys are doing it, so I guess I need to do it as well.
All of our technicians are required to wear face protection, face masks, face coverings, as we call them, because mask is actually an OSHA term that has to be qualified in a particular way. But they will all wear face coverings. Our performers who are in the pool can't, because it's actually dangerous for them. But as soon as they go backstage, they will have to put on a face covering. So that will be, you know, in that area, we are going to make sure that everybody's wearing them. And, you know, we've been told that using a kind of typical face covering, such as one of these, is what you need, and you don't need N95. And now we're understanding that, you know, we can utilize N95 where there's close contact. So we're going to be looking at that as well. Last but not least on this, and I think, you know, I think this is an important thing, and it's difficult, is I think to allow people to not come to work because they feel ill, which we tell everybody, if you don't feel good, don't come to work. Everybody's going to have to institute some type of sick days. So that people feel they can, you know, go to the doctor and they don't have to worry about, you know, their salaries, because in our experience, that's the biggest issue in terms of getting people to stay home. You know, they just can't afford it. So.
Right. So here's another question that's come in, and I know we don't know this answer for Broadway yet, Ryan, but John and Rick might be able to speak on it. Are the prices of the tickets to all of your venues going to increase due to the increased cost incurred? So John, are you seeing that at parks, that they're adding, I know our billing department saw a 3% COVID fee added to our invoices. So are you seeing parks doing that as well? And then Rick, you as well. So John, take it away first.
Yeah, that hasn't really been something that's been overly apparent as of yet. I think Rick touched on it a while ago, is you do what you have to do in this situation. And you know, although there's not anywhere near the amount of revenue streams that are coming in for attractions, they're looking to try to get started maybe in a lower capacity. And, you know, in order to make margins and make expenses, you need to have capacity. So I think to be able to start at the fee that is normal, or a ticket price that has been normal, is just something that we've been seeing. It may come into play a little bit down the road if somebody's not, quite hitting the revenue and making those expenses. But it isn't something that's been overly apparent right now. I think it's kind of that mode of everybody's pitching in to help each other out. So as much as you hear about price gouging for masks or sanitizer or whatever, ticket price is kind of going along that same line.
Rick, I think you might there.
Oh, sorry. In Vegas, because we are like a theme park, we're integrated resorts. We have a variety of different things. I would dare say, if you want to come to Vegas, now's the time to do it. Nobody's raising prices. I would say mostly there are incredible deals that include things such as resort credits and food and beverage credits. I know we have special food and beverage packages. And I think, most of us in this business, at least my feeling is, 2020 is done. We've got to get through this year whole in some way. And looking at, we've got to make 30% or whatever, that's a fantasy for anybody who's thinking of that. We're looking at lowering prices to get people in, to make them know that we're safe, and then dealing with the realities of this down the road when we will be able to raise prices again to pay for the service. But I know everybody, who's in this business, theme parks, whatever, we're spending probably millions and millions of dollars on, disinfection and wipes and sanitizers, and you can't pass that along to anybody right now.
Sure. Rick, so here's another question for you. You're the popular one today. If someone in the cast got the virus, do you have a full backup cast that you're thinking you're going to need, or will you need to close the show to allow the cast to quarantine? I know you don't have shows running, but have you put some plans in place?
Yeah, if somebody came down with it, we'd have to close the show and quarantine the show. We don't have a full backup cast. I think that would be unrealistic no matter where you went. And I think you just have to, deal with that reality. And once again, you hope that people are following the rules and will limit that exposure. But if it happens, that's just what you're going to have to do.
Yeah, we've noticed in the attractions industry as well, a lot of facilities will have certain letters of staff. So you might have an A staff, a B staff, a C staff, and those staffs will work in individual days. So that way, if there is a breakout or something happens, that a staff that works on a different day, that entire staff would still be able to come to work. So there are some things and some plans that people are thinking of to be a little bit creative in scheduling, to be able to ensure that you at least have a minimal staff to be able to function if there would be a breakout of some sort.
Great. Next, this is closing out our list of questions here, but for any panel member today, what will be the role of entertainment technology in post-COVID-19 operations? So Ryan, Rick, John, what is your thought on technology in entertainment production?
I think there's always a space for technology. I think the technology has to make sense in the context of a normal business process. And so one of the things that I did see people trying, for example, are drones that can disperse cleaning solutions and stuff like that. That's not particularly practical. And so spending money on that technology from like an indoor theater standpoint doesn't make a lot of sense for us. But I think that if you could find ways to implement, I've seen some interesting ideas about UVC doorways that people walk through to sterilize and things like that. I think that there is a world where we should be looking to that, because who's also to say that our timeline for a vaccine is going to come through in the way that we're hoping it will. And I think the second point to that is, who knows when the next one of these things comes down the road, and whatever we learn from this, we should be taking away to make things better and safer for the people who work for us.
Yeah, I would just add from an attraction standpoint, obviously the newest and coolest effects for any show or element of entertainment, we want to see those to continue, but I don't really think people are interested in going into a complete virtual lifestyle. People do want to interact with other people, and I think that's going to continue. So I would look at it more kind of the way Ryan was alluding to, is more on the operational side of things. is how we make it safe for people to come to see these, new effects in the entertainment world. We may be a little further away from them. We may be a little further away from each other as we're watching these things. But, I would hope that it wouldn't turn into some sort of, virtual world that we are trying to look at things through screens and not having that human interaction. So the attractions industry will continue to look at ways to make that a reality.
Yeah, I think the kind of technology that you really have to deal with is actually not theater technology so much, but I don't believe we're going to be in masks 2 years from now, but I think that type of technology, where the public has to wear that on a regular basis, that's really the place where you want to have something that's comfortable, that you don't really think about it. And that's the kind of technology I think that really needs to take an enormous leap. And the other thing is, seating people in a theater. If we have to keep up social distancing, having programs, artificial intelligence, whatever, that helps us maximize when people come to a theater, how you sit them, so that, as they move around, as you have different audiences, you can keep that 6 foot. And you could probably get another, 8 to 10% occupancy in a theater if there was a program or some way to figure out how to actually put people in and keep that social distancing.
Yeah, that's great. So John, Rick, and Ryan, thank you so very much for today. That's all the time we have. And thank you for all the attendees for joining this webinar with E-Trade Cruise. In addition, I want to thank the many individuals who helped bring today's webinar to life, and all the attendees on today's webinar. Just remember, all of us coming together will help us all come back stronger. So sharing this advice is very helpful to all of us, no matter what company we work for. Just as a reminder, we will be sending a recording of this webinar out tomorrow. Also remember, the next live webinar will be with hotel operations and concessions, and that will be happening July 9th. And then there will be a manufacturer and suppliers webinar for all of the vendors on today's call. That will be happening on my birthday, which is July 30th. So to attend that webinar, you have to send me a birthday gift. So that being said, on behalf of C-Trade Cruise, thank you very much. Thank you, our panelists, and have an awesome day, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.